The ship was dying, and everyone aboard knew it. Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the dark corridors of the Arkwright and listened to the sounds of her vessel falling apart around her. The emergency lights flickered with a sickly red glow. The life support systems groaned and wheezed like an old man taking his final breaths. And the silence between those sounds was worse than any alarm could ever be. 12,000 people had left Earth 18 months ago with dreams of building a new home among the stars. And now those dreams were turning to ash in the cold void between galaxies. The main reactor had failed without warning 6 days ago, and the explosion had crippled everything. The engines were dead, the communications array was barely functioning, and the backup power systems were draining faster than anyone had predicted. They had maybe 6 months of air left, and Earth was decades away at their current speed. Elena stopped outside the observation deck and watched a young mother singing softly to her crying baby. The woman looked up, and their eyes met, and Elena saw something in that gaze that broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. She saw hope, desperate and fragile hope, hope that the captain would somehow save them all. But Elena had no miracles to offer. She had sent distress signals into every direction of space and received nothing but silence in return. Humanity was alone out here, and no one was coming to rescue them. "Captain," her first officer said as he approached with heavy footsteps, "the crew is asking what we should tell the passengers. They want to know if there is any hope at all." Elena opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. What could she possibly say to 12,000 people who were counting on her to save their lives? She never got the chance to find an answer. The sensor alarms suddenly screamed to life, and the entire ship shuddered as something massive dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of them. Elena ran to the nearest display screen and felt her breath catch in her throat at what she saw. The vessel that hung in space before them was enormous beyond anything humans had ever built. It stretched across the void like a creature from ancient myths, and its hull glowed with soft pulses of blue and purple light that seemed almost alive. It was terrifying and beautiful and impossible all at once. "They are hailing us," the communications officer reported with a voice that trembled between fear and wonder. The face that appeared on their screens was not human. The being had large dark eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of countless centuries, and skin that glowed with gentle bioluminescence like stars captured beneath the surface, and features that were both alien and somehow kind. She wore robes that shimmered with the same soft light as her ship, and when she spoke, her voice was like music from instruments that had never existed on Earth. "I am Elder Sorvith of the Velomith," the alien said. "We detected your distress signal, and we have come to offer assistance. Please do not be afraid." Elena felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not care who witnessed her crying. "Please," she begged, "please help us. We have children here and families, and we are dying. We have been calling for help for 6 days, and no one has answered." Sorvith's bioluminescence flickered in patterns that Elena would later learn indicated deep sadness and compassion. And the ancient alien made a decision that would echo through centuries. "Prepare your people," Sorvith said gently. "We will save every one of you." What followed should have been impossible. The Galactic Council had strict laws against interfering with species that had not yet achieved official first contact status, and the penalties for violation were severe. Any species that broke these laws faced sanctions and condemnation and loss of standing among the great powers of the galaxy. Sorvith knew all of this, and she gave the order anyway. Velomith shuttles crossed the void and docked with the crippled human vessel, and teams of glowing aliens boarded with supplies and equipment and hope. Their engineers worked alongside human technicians to repair the damaged systems. Their healers tended to the sick and frightened with gentle hands that radiated warmth and light. And their leaders spoke with Elena about a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. For 3 weeks, the two species worked side by side, and humans learned that they were not alone in the universe. A young boy named Thomas Chun had fallen terribly ill from the stress and the cold, and a Valanith healer named Mirith stayed by his bedside for 2 days without rest. She sang songs in her own language that made Thomas feel safe, even though he could not understand the words, and she held his hand through the worst of his fever. "Why are you being so kind to us?" Thomas asked when he finally recovered. "You do not know us at all." Mira smiled, and her glow brightened with warmth. "Because kindness does not require knowing someone," she answered softly, "and because every child deserves to feel safe and loved, no matter where they come from." When the repairs were complete and the Arkwright was ready to continue its journey, Elder Sorvith personally guided the human ship to a habitable world where they could build their colony. She gave them star charts and medical knowledge and technology that would help them survive in their new home. But before she departed, Captain Vasquez needed to understand why these aliens had risked so much for strangers. "Elder Sorvith," Elena asked with tears in her eyes, "why did you do this? Your laws forbid it, and your people will suffer for this choice. You asked nothing from us in return. Why would you sacrifice so much?" Sorvith took Elena's hands in her own glowing fingers, and her ancient eyes filled with light that was both beautiful and sad. "Because long ago, my people faced the same death you faced," she said. "We drifted alone in the darkness between stars, with no hope and no rescue. We called out for help, and we prayed, and we waited. But no one came for us, and no one answered our cries." Her bioluminescence dimmed with the weight of that ancient memory. "We survived through luck alone, but we never forgot that terrible loneliness. And we swore that if we ever found another species dying in the void, we would not let them feel the despair that we had known. We would be the help that never came for us." Elena wept and embraced the alien elder. "We will remember this forever," she promised. "Humanity will never forget what you have done." "I swear it on my life." Sorvith smiled kindly, but her expression held a knowing sadness. "Many species have made such promises," she said gently, "and all of them have forgotten within a generation. Gratitude fades quickly from mortal hearts. But your words are kind, and we thank you for them. The Valanith faced terrible consequences for their compassion. They lost their seat on the Galactic Council and suffered sanctions that would last for centuries. But they did not regret their choice. And on a world that humans named New Hope, Captain Elena Vasquez gathered the survivors and made them swear an oath that would change the galaxy forever. "We will remember," she declared. "We will teach our children, and our children will teach theirs. The Valanith saved us, and humanity will never forget." The Valanith had no idea what they had awakened. They had saved humanity, and humanity always remembered its debts. 300 years had passed since the Arkwright drifted dying in the void, and the universe had never seen anything like what humanity had become. They spread across the stars with a hunger that amazed and frightened older civilizations. They built colonies on harsh worlds that other species had declared impossible. They established trade routes that connected distant corners of the galaxy. And they earned a reputation as builders and dreamers and warriors who never surrendered. But there was something else about humans that no other species could understand. They never stopped talking about the Valanith. In every human school, across every human world, children as young as 5 years old learned the story of the Arkwright's salvation before they learned almost anything else. Teachers would dim the lights in their classrooms and speak in hushed voices about the dying ship and the 12,000 souls who faced death in the cold darkness. And the children would listen with wide eyes full of wonder. And what did the Valanith do? The teachers would ask. "They saved us." The children would shout together with voices that rang with pride. And what did they ask for in return? Nothing at all. And what do we say to them? We remember the dark. That phrase had become more than just words to humanity. It was a greeting between strangers and a promise between friends. It was an oath that meant you would never abandon someone in need, never turn away from someone who was suffering, never forget that kindness had saved your entire species from extinction. Every human naval vessel carried a small crystal that glowed with soft bioluminescence, a gift that the Velenith had given to the survivors of the Arkwright so long ago. These crystals had been carefully preserved and divided over the centuries until every ship could carry one, and captains treated them as the most sacred objects on their vessels. Admiral Chun Wei commanded the largest fleet in human space, and he was the direct descendant of Thomas Chun, the boy whose life had been saved by the healer Mirith. The stories his great-grandmother had told him about that gentle alien had shaped everything he believed about honor and duty. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and touched the glowing crystal that hung beside his command chair, and he remembered his grandmother's words from when he was just a child. The Velenith taught us something important, she had said. They taught us that kindness given freely is the most precious gift in the universe. They saved us without expecting anything back, and that is why we must give them everything. A debt paid only when demanded is not honor, it is mere transaction. Human merchants traveled across the galaxy, and wherever they went, they spoke of the Velenith with reverence and gratitude. They offered the Velenith trade agreements so favorable that other species accused them of madness. They shared technology and knowledge and resources with these gentle aliens who had never asked for any of it. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka had dedicated her entire life to restoring the Velenith reputation in galactic politics. She had spent 60 years fighting against bureaucracy and prejudice and the short memories of species who could not comprehend why humans cared so much about something that had happened so long ago. The Velenith violated our laws, council representatives would say with smug voices. They interfered with a primitive species, and they deserved punishment. Why you humans keep defending them? Yuki would smile with patience that hid steel beneath its surface. Because your laws punished compassion, she would answer calmly. The Velenith saved 12,000 lives, and their only crime was showing mercy. If your laws condemn kindness, then your laws need to change. The other species of the galaxy watched humanity with growing confusion and curiosity. The Turellians had been studying humans for 2 centuries, and they still could not explain this strange behavior. Their scientists wrote papers and gave lectures and held conferences, trying to understand why a species with such short lifespans would maintain gratitude for so many generations. It defies all our models, the lead Turellian researcher admitted. Most species forget debts within 50 years. The neural pathways that store gratitude simply degrade over time. But humans have somehow made remembering into a cultural imperative that transcends individual memory. The Velenith themselves were the most confused of all. Elder Mirith had lived for over 400 years, and she had seen dozens of species make promises of eternal gratitude. She had watched every single one of those promises fade and die as generations passed and memories grew dim. But humanity was different. She sat in the great council chamber of Salunus and listened to reports from Velenith ambassadors who had visited human worlds, and she could not believe what she was hearing. They teach our story in their schools, one ambassador reported. Children who were born 300 years after the rescue know Elder Sorvith's name and can recite her words. They wear our crystals like holy relics. They have built monuments to honor us. Their merchants give us advantages that hurt their own profits, another added. When we asked why they would do this, they seemed confused by the question. They said it was simply what was owed. Mirith's bioluminescence flickered with an emotion she could not name. It was something like hope mixed with disbelief, something like joy mixed with wonder. I do not understand them, she admitted to her fellow elders. We saved them because it was right, not because we wanted payment. We expected nothing from them. Perhaps that is exactly why they remember. A young elder named Virith suggested thoughtfully. We helped them without conditions, and so they feel the debt more deeply than if we had demanded repayment. Our selflessness has become a mirror that shows them what they want to be. A human ambassador named Sarah Okonkwo had requested an audience with the elders, and she arrived wearing the glowing crystal of her ancestors around her neck. She was young by Velanith standards, barely 30 years old, but she carried herself with dignity and purpose. "Honored elders," she said as she stood before them, "I bring a message from the United Human Colonies. I bring a renewal of the promise that Captain Elena Vasquez made 3 centuries ago." She paused, and her eyes shone with tears. "We remember the dark," she declared. "We remember that you came for us when the universe had abandoned us. We remember that you sacrificed everything to save strangers. And we want you to know that humanity will never stop honoring that debt." Mirith descended from her seat and stood before this young human, whose species lived such brief lives but carried such long memories. "Child," she said gently, "you owe us nothing. We did what was right, and we would do it again without hesitation. You do not need to keep paying a debt that we have never claimed." Sarah smiled and took the ancient healer's glowing hands in her own. "That is exactly what Elder Sorvith told Captain Vasquez," she said, "and that is exactly why we will never stop. You taught us that kindness without expectation is the greatest gift anyone can give, and the only way to truly honor such a gift is to pass it forward forever." The elders looked at each other with expressions of wonder and hope. They had saved humanity 300 years ago, expecting nothing in return. Now they were beginning to realize that they had awakened something extraordinary. Humanity remembered, and humanity would always remember. And someday soon, the galaxy would learn what that truly meant. The Kreth Dominion had conquered half the galaxy, and they had never known defeat. Their warships moved through space like hungry predators searching for prey, and wherever they went they left nothing but death and chains behind them. They believed that strength was the only law that mattered, and they had proven that belief true against 47 different species over 3 centuries of endless conquest. Now their hungry eyes had turned toward the Volinith homeworld of Salunis. Matriarch Ilian stood on the highest balcony of the ancient council spire and watched the sunset paint the crystal towers of her city in shades of gold and crimson. And she wondered if this would be the last sunset her people would ever see as a free civilization. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Elder Sorvith, the one who had saved humanity so long ago, and she had inherited her ancestors' wisdom and compassion. But wisdom and compassion meant nothing against 800 warships armed with weapons that could crack planets like eggs. "Matriarch," her aide said as he approached with terror barely hidden in his voice, "the Kreth fleet has taken position at the edge of our system. They are demanding our immediate and unconditional surrender." Ilian closed her eyes and felt the weight of 10,000 years of history pressing down upon her shoulders. Her people were healers and scholars and artists. They had not built weapons of war for millennia because they believed that violence was a failure of imagination and wisdom. Their ships were designed to explore and heal and teach, not to fight and kill and destroy. That philosophy had made them respected across the galaxy, but now it had left them helpless. "What are their terms?" she asked quietly. Her aide's bioluminescence dimmed with despair as he read the Kreth message. "They demand that all Velanith surrender themselves for relocation to labor camps throughout the Dominion. Our culture will be preserved only in archives. Our homeworld will be stripped of all useful resources. Any resistance will result in immediate planetary bombardment." Ilian felt something cold settle in her heart, but it was not fear. It was sorrow for all the beauty and knowledge and life that was about to be erased from existence. "And what does the Galactic Council say?" she asked, though she already knew what the answer would be. They are holding emergency sessions and forming committees to study the situation. They have expressed deep concern and strong disapproval. But no one is sending military aid. No one wants to risk war with the Kreth. Of course, they would not help. The Council had always valued procedure over justice, and many of the elder species still resented the Valaneth for breaking the precious laws to save those humans 300 years ago. Some council members had openly said that the Valaneth were finally receiving the punishment they deserved for their reckless compassion. Ilian walked through the streets of her beloved city one final time and saw her people preparing for the end. Families gathered together to share what might be their last moments of freedom. Elders sang the ancient songs that had been passed down through countless generations. And children who had never known violence tried to understand why their parents were weeping. A young mother approached the matriarch with an infant cradled in her luminous arms. "Matriarch," the mother pleaded with tears flowing down her glowing cheeks, "is there truly no hope for us? Is there no one in all the galaxy who will stand with us against this darkness?" Ilian touched the infant's tiny face and felt her heart shatter into a million fragments. "I do not know," she admitted softly, "but I swear to you that I will do everything in my power before I let our people be taken into slavery." She returned to the council chamber and sat before the communication console, and she began to compose a message that she believed would be the last words she ever spoke as leader of a free people. But she did not send a desperate plea for rescue. The Valaneth had long ago learned that expecting salvation from others only brought disappointment. Instead, she sent a farewell to all the friends they had made throughout their long history. "To our friends among the stars," she spoke into the recorder with a voice that remained steady despite the grief that filled her soul. "This is Matriarch Ilian of the Valaneth. Our homeworld faces annihilation at the hands of the Kreth Dominion, and we have no means to defend ourselves against their overwhelming might." She paused, and her bioluminescence brightened with quiet defiance. "We do not ask for rescue because we understand that no one can stand against the Kreth alone. We send this message only to say goodbye and to express our gratitude for all the friendship and kindness you have shown us over the millennia. Please remember us fondly and remember that compassion existed in this universe, even at the very end. To our human friends especially, we send our deepest love and thanks. You never forgot what Sorvith did for your ancestors, and your loyalty has brought warmth to our hearts for 300 years. Do not grieve for us too long, for we face the darkness knowing that kindness survives in species like yours. Farewell to all, and may the light of the stars guide you always." She ended the transmission and sent it into the void, and then she sat in the growing darkness and waited for the end to arrive. But across the galaxy, in the human capital city on the world called New Hope, Admiral James Okonkwo was sharing dinner with his wife and children when his personal communicator suddenly screamed with an emergency alert that made everyone at the table jump. He read the Valaneth farewell message once with widening eyes, and then he read it again while his hands began to tremble. And then he stood so quickly that his chair crashed to the floor behind him. "James?" His wife asked with alarm in her voice. "What has happened? What is wrong?" His face had transformed into something hard and cold like stone, but his eyes burned with a fire that his wife had never witnessed before. "The Valaneth are dying," he said in a voice that was quiet but terrible in its intensity. "The Kreth Dominion is about to destroy them. They sent us a farewell because they believe no one cares enough to save them." "What are you going to do?" his wife asked, though she already knew because she understood the man she had married. Admiral Okonkwo was already moving toward the door. "I am going to prove them wrong," he declared with absolute certainty. "Contact Fleet Command immediately and tell them to mobilize every single ship we have. Tell them the Valaneth need us and humanity remembers. James, the Kreth outnumber us badly. Their fleet has over 800 warships." He stopped at the doorway and turned to look at her with eyes that held neither doubt nor fear. "Then we will fight with everything we have," he said simply, "because I will not let the Velenith die believing that the universe abandoned them. I will not let them experience the silence that they saved us from. We remember the dark, and today we finally answered that debt." Within hours, the greatest fleet humanity had ever assembled began to gather. The time had come to repay a 300-year-old kindness. Grand Admiral Varax of the Kreth Dominion stood on the command deck of his mighty flagship and smiled at the beautiful planet rotating slowly in the darkness below. Selûnus would make a fine addition to the Dominion. Its resources would fuel their war machine for generations, and its people would serve as workers in the labor camps that kept the Empire running. This conquest would be easy because the Velenith were soft and weak and had no weapons to resist. "The deadline expires in 1 hour," his second officer reported with eager anticipation. "The Velenith have not responded to our demands. They are probably praying to their pathetic gods and crying like the cowards they are." Varax laughed, and his laughter echoed through the bridge like the sound of breaking bones. "Let them pray," he sneered. "Their gods will not save them. Nothing can save them. When the hour ends, we will begin bombardment and show them what happens to species that are too weak to defend themselves." He had planned this invasion perfectly and accounted for every possible variable. The Galactic Council was too cowardly to intervene. The Velenith had no military capability whatsoever, and there was no other power in this region of space foolish enough to challenge the might of 800 Kreth warships. Everything was proceeding exactly according to his calculations. But Grand Admiral Varax had made one terrible mistake. He had forgotten about the humans. 47 minutes before the deadline expired, every sensor on every Kreth ship began screaming warnings as something massive tore through the fabric of space and emerged from faster-than-light travel. Then more ships appeared behind the first, and more behind those, and still more until the void itself seemed to be vomiting vessels into existence. 412 human warships dropped out of the darkness like an avalanche of steel and fury, and their weapons were already charged, their shields already raised, and their crews already standing at battle stations with fire in their hearts. But the humans had not come alone. Behind the human fleet came ships from 17 other species. The Durelians whose colony had been saved by human doctors. The Methrani whose world had been defended by human soldiers. The Khazari who owed humans a debt from the trade wars. And over a dozen more civilizations who had answered humanity's call. Varax stared at his tactical displays and felt something he had not experienced in 50 years of conquest. He felt the cold touch of uncertainty creeping into his confidence. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" he demanded. His answer came in the form of a transmission broadcast on every frequency, and the face that appeared on his screen was that of a human with gray hair and dark skin and eyes that burned with righteous fury. "This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Human Colonies." The human announced, "You have brought your fleet into the territory of our friends and our saviors. You will withdraw immediately, or you will learn why humanity never forgets its debts." Varax recovered his composure and forced himself to laugh again. "You are outnumbered nearly 2-to-1, foolish human," he mocked. "Your fleet is impressive for such a young species, but it cannot defeat the Dominion. Leave now, and perhaps I will let some of you survive." Admiral Okonkwo smiled, and there was something absolutely terrifying in that smile. "We did not come here to defeat you," he said calmly. "We came here to die for our friends, if that is what it takes." Every human in this fleet volunteered, knowing they might never return home. "We do not fight for territory or resources or political advantage. We fight for honor and love and a debt that is 300 years old." He leaned forward, and his eyes were like twin stars of cold fire. "Can your soldiers say the same, Grand Admiral?" Will they die for you as gladly as my people will die for the Velomyth? Shall we find out together? The Battle of Selûnes began with fire and thunder. The Kreth had superior numbers and firepower, but the humans had something the Dominion had never encountered before. They had warriors who fought not for conquest or survival, but for gratitude and sacred duty. Human ships charged into the Kreth formation with reckless ferocity that defied every tactical principle. They did not fight like soldiers protecting territory. They fought like family defending their own. Captain Maria Santos commanded the destroyer Gratitude, and when her ship suffered critical damage, she did not retreat. Instead, she aimed her crippled vessel directly at the nearest Kreth battleship and opened a channel to her crew. "We remember the dark," she said with iron in her voice. "For the Velomyth and for humanity." "For the Velomyth." Her crew roared back as one. The Gratitude slammed into the Kreth battleship, and both vessels vanished in an explosion that lit up the void like a newborn star. Lieutenant Commander Ahmed Hassan led his fighter squadron directly into the guns of a Kreth carrier to protect a Velomyth transport filled with refugees. His entire wing was destroyed, but the transport escaped with 4,000 civilians aboard. The cruiser Vasquez's Promise positioned itself between the planet and a Kreth bombardment group. She absorbed 19 direct hits before finally breaking apart, but her sacrifice bought enough time for ground defenses to activate. On the surface of Selûnes, Matriarch Ilian watched the battle raging in the skies above her world and wept with emotions she could not name. Shock and gratitude and grief and hope all tangled together in her ancient heart. "They came," she whispered over and over. "They actually came for us." The Kreth had never faced an enemy like this. They did not understand warriors who smiled as they sacrificed themselves. They could not comprehend soldiers who cheered while charging into certain death. They had no answer for an enemy who considered defeat impossible because their honor demanded victory. When a human missile barrage destroyed the Kreth command ship and killed Grand Admiral Varax, something shattered in the Dominion fleet. They had expected easy prey and found instead warriors who fought like demons and died like heroes. And suddenly conquering a single planet did not seem worth such a terrible cost. The Kreth broke and ran. Those who escaped carried stories of the humans who had emerged from nowhere to defend a dying civilization. And those stories would spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Admiral Okonkwo looked at the casualty reports after the battle and felt hot tears rolling down his weathered face. 94 human ships destroyed and over 38,000 humans dead. And yet he knew every single one of them had considered it an honor to sacrifice themselves. Human dropships descended to Selûnes, carrying soldiers who immediately established medical stations and distributed supplies. They worked alongside the Velomyth they had come to save, healing wounds and offering comfort, and asking nothing in return. A young lieutenant approached Matriarch Ilian and knelt before her with the bioluminescent crystal of his ancestors glowing on his collar. "Matriarch," he said through tears, "Admiral Okonkwo sends his respects and asks if you need anything else." Ilian lifted the young human's face and looked into his eyes. "Why?" she asked with her voice breaking. "Why did you sacrifice so much for us?" The lieutenant smiled despite his tears. "Because you came for us once," he answered simply, "and humanity never forgets. The debt had been paid in blood and fire and love." The galaxy would never be the same after the Battle of Selûnes. News of what humanity had done spread across the stars faster than any ship could travel, and everywhere the story was told, it ignited something powerful in the hearts of those who heard it. Diplomats and scientists and philosophers tried to explain what had driven 40,000 humans to die for a species that could offer them nothing in return. It defies all rational analysis. The Turellian ambassador complained during an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The humans gained no strategic advantage from this conflict. They acquired no territory and no resources. They simply threw their ships against the Kreth and sacrificed tens of thousands of lives for aliens who are not even their own kind. Perhaps there was a secret agreement we do not know about, a Methrony delegate suggested. Perhaps the Velanoth promised them something valuable in exchange for protection. Human Ambassador Yuki Tanaka IV rose to address the assembly with quiet dignity. She had been named after her famous ancestor, and she carried that legacy with pride. There was no secret deal, she stated calmly. There were no hidden arrangements or promises of payment. 300 years ago, the Velanoths saved our people when we were dying alone in the darkness of space. They sacrificed their standing in this very council to rescue strangers they had never met. And humanity simply chose to remember that kindness and repay it when they needed us most. Confused murmurs rippled through the council chamber. But that was 300 years ago, someone protested loudly. No civilization maintains debts for that long. Gratitude always fades within a few generations. Ambassador Tanaka smiled with a warmth that held no arrogance. Perhaps that is true for other species, she acknowledged. But humanity is different. We remember our enemies, yes, but we also remember our friends. We remember kindness and compassion and sacrifice. And we believe that debts of honor never expire, no matter how many centuries pass. The consequences of the Battle of Selûnes transformed the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. The Kreth Dominion began to collapse almost immediately. Species they had conquered and terrorized for generations heard about the humans who had proven that the Dominion could be defeated, and something awakened in their oppressed hearts. Rebellions erupted across Dominion territory like fires spreading through dry forests. Every time the Kreth crushed one uprising, 3 more would ignite. Their soldiers were stretched too thin, and their confidence had been broken at Selûnes. Within a single decade, the once mighty Dominion had fractured into a dozen, squabbling fragments that would never threaten anyone again. The Galactic Council underwent a transformation as well. Species that had grown tired of endless committees and meaningless procedures demanded real change, and they pointed to humanity as proof that action mattered more than debate. The Velanoth were offered a permanent seat on the Reformed Council. Restored to the position of honor they had lost 3 centuries ago when they saved the Arkwright. But Matriarch Ilian accepted the seat on one condition, that she would not negotiate. Humanity will sit beside us, she declared before the assembled delegates. They will have a voice equal to any ancient power, regardless of how young their civilization might be. This is our requirement, and it cannot be changed. The council agreed, and for the first time in galactic history, a species barely 400 years old took its place among civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years. On the anniversary of the battle, a new tradition was born that would endure for millennia. Every species that had fought alongside humanity at Selûnes gathered at the planet to remember those who had fallen. Human veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with Velanoth elders, and representatives from all the allied species joined together in a ceremony that celebrated not just military victory, but the triumph of compassion over cruelty. Admiral James Okonkwo stood before the gathered multitude with his hair now completely white and his body weakened by age. But his voice remained strong as he spoke to the assembly. Today we honor the 38,000 humans who gave their lives defending Selûnes, he declared. But we also remember why they were willing to make that sacrifice. They died because 300 years ago a Velanoth named Sorvith chose to help strangers in desperate need. They died because humanity swore an oath that we would never forget such kindness. They died to prove that some debts are worth paying with everything you have. He paused and looked at Matriarch Ilian standing beside him with her bioluminescence blazing bright. Elder Sorvith saved 12,000 humans on a crippled ship, he continued. And because of that single act of mercy, An entire civilization still exists today. Kindness echoes through the ages in ways we cannot foresee, and this galaxy has learned that compassion is never weakness. It is the mightiest strength of all. The story spread to every inhabited world in known space. It was told in thousands of languages across millions of planets. Parents told it to their children at bedtime, and teachers taught it in classrooms, and storytellers recited it beneath alien skies. It became proof that the universe was not just a cold and empty void, but a place where love could flourish and gratitude could span centuries. Species that had never trusted one another began forming alliances based on friendship rather than fear. The galaxy slowly became a kinder place, and it had all begun with one choice made by one alien who refused to let strangers to die alone in the dark. Matriarch Alien lived for another 100 years, long enough to see her people thrive once again. The Velenith rebuilt their crystal cities and continued their ancient traditions of healing and learning, but they were no longer isolated. Human students filled their universities, and human doctors worked in their hospitals, and human children laughed and played with Velenith children in streets that had once faced total destruction. In her final days, Alien rested in her chamber surrounded by those she loved most, both human and Velenith alike. Her bioluminescence had faded to a gentle glow that spoke of peace and acceptance. Her young aide Sorvethan, named in honor of the legendary matriarch, knelt beside her. "Is there anything you need, matriarch?" he asked softly. Alien smiled, and her light flickered with warmth. "Only to say one thing before I join my ancestors," she whispered. She looked at the humans scattered around her, the descendants of those her foremother had saved so many generations ago, and joy filled her ancient heart. "Sorveth," she breathed to the beloved memory of her ancestor across the centuries. "You saved the right ones. You could never have known what they would become, but you trusted in the power of kindness, and kindness rewarded your faith." They remembered, grandmother. Humanity remembered forever. Her light faded gently into peaceful darkness, but she was smiling until the very end. And across the galaxy, in archives and songs and stories and memories, the legend lived on eternally. It taught every species that kindness was never foolish, that gratitude could outlast empires, that honor meant keeping promises even when no one expected you to, and that humanity always paid its debts. They showed humanity compassion once, and humanity repaid them with a legend that would never die.